Thank you very much. And without further ado, one of our very own locals, Heather Osborn.
Thank you. Today we're going to talk about turning those incidents that we all can't escape into insights and not insults. We want to take this fine art of learning from failure, and someone called out that I crossed out without losing your mind. There's no such thing as not losing your mind. You're going to lose your mind. It's just a matter of how you manage it and what you get out of it. So who am I? What am I doing here? Ask myself that every day. I'm an engineering manager at Zapier for developer enablement. That is the team that handles the incident management, the observability, and the service catalog. So all of these things that help the engineers be successful. I've been in engineering, in tech, for, I'm going to say 30 years. I'm aging myself, and I am coming to terms with this, but it is what it is. I remember a time before everything was on fire, and if it was on fire, it was off in the colo, and you didn't necessarily have to pay attention to it until somebody actually went and physically put it out. Since COVID, I've been work from home entirely. My interaction with people is I see them in the Brady Bunch boxes, and I actually never see people in 3 dimensions. I see my cats way more than I see people. You can tell from my laptop bag, it's covered in cat hair. I'll say for sanity, I run long distances, and when that doesn't work out for me, and knocking these things, pounding the pavement knocks these things out of your head, I go out in the desert, I be a jackass, and then I come back refreshed and resumed and comfortable with running through these incidents again. I have been on call since the dawn of time. Being a manager does not preclude you from being on call. If anything, it makes it worse, because if you're getting called in the middle of the night, that means something big has gone down, and it is time to deal with that. And I'll say I've attended more than my fair share of post-incident reviews, retrospectives, postmortems, whatever you call them. That means I've seen everything from the dog with "this is fine" on fire, this level of denial, to the full-blown digital crime scenes and all of those in between. So let's talk about these incidents and these postmortems, or whatever you're calling them. So why are we here? Incidents should be something that drives learning and not the finger pointing. You don't want to have the hindsight bias. You don't want to have those awkward silences where everybody's sitting in a room going, I'm not going to speak up because I didn't do it. You want to encourage the conversation. You want to get the education out of these things instead of finger pointing. Was it Bob that did it? Well, Bob doing it is not the problem. It is the deeper issue of what actually contributed to making these things happen. So who's ever been in a retrospective that feels more like a criminal investigation than something that's actually useful? Yep. I can't imagine anyone here won't have raised their hand, because the culture of let's resolve this turns into a let's figure out why, who did this. And that's not the right way to approach it. Incident retrospectives should be about learning and improvement. Too often they turn into assigning blame. Like I said, Bob did it. It's Bob's fault. It's always Bob's fault. Turns into rewriting history. Well, this is the way we've always done things, and yes, of course this is going to happen, and so on. It just kind of snowballs into an issue. And it also turns into a box-checking exercise. Why are you writing the retrospective? Well, because the guys upstairs said I need to write a retrospective. And that takes away all of the merits of running through these exercises. So the real problem, though, is the psychological safety aspect of it. You need to go into a room, feel comfortable, that you can talk about things without getting your name checked on the boxes it was this guy's fault. You want to feel safe in sharing your mistakes. You want to feel safe saying you don't know, and you want to avoid those assumptions about this is happening because this is how it always happens, and you want to be able to expose the uncertainties. If you don't do that, you never get the opportunity to improve your system reliability. So whether you call it an incident review, a retrospective, a postmortem, etc., it's the same thing, and you need to make the same considerations. I'll use retrospective for the sake of this presentation because it's the comfortable term. It's a good practice to do all through your organization, not just in your incidents. It is how the software development, or how the software release go? How did your roadmap go? All of these things, you want to do that assessment. You want to look back on it. Postmortem is actually a good word. It's something died. What happened? Let's dissect it and figure out what died. But it gets a lot of negative connotations, and some people, that psychological safety I mentioned, don't feel comfortable when you go into things saying this is a postmortem because it's got that morbid connotation. So here, I'll ask for a shout out. What's the biggest cause of incidents? Okay, you're all right, but you're all wrong. Well, incidents, I'll say, like I said, you're all right, you're all wrong. It depends, I think, is a better term for you're not wrong, it depends on the situation. Incidents are a chance to get free training for your company, free training for your engineers, free training for your DevOps, free training for everyone. It is an opportunity to learn how your systems work. You can document things till the cows come home. You can draw all these diagrams. You can do your dependency mappings. You can do all of these things. But until you understand how they actually work, you can't really do anything about it. You want to make it an opportunity to adapt to avoid failure as opposed to just avoiding failure. Systems are complex. Everybody knows you have that one system that you find out at 3 o'clock in the morning, lives under somebody's desk somewhere. It's a laptop. Nobody's seen it since 2002. And it is an integral part of your system. These are not things that you can plan for. These are not things that you can map out in such a way that you know that you can prevent this incident every time. If you treat these things as one-off mistakes, you can't use them as learning opportunities to expand your knowledge base, expand your reaction time, expand the way that you move forward in the future. Logically, you want to reduce incidents, but more importantly, you want to build the muscle memory that helps you prevent those incidents. You want to get as much information about process improvements that you can do so that this time spent under stress, under duress, trying to recover systems isn't lost. You want to get that free training out of these incidents. Obviously, you don't want to be the person that a large outage gets named after. I'm sure some of you might have outages that, oh yeah, the Great Bob incident of 2012. No, don't be that person. You want to make sure that that Bob incident is the metric that shows how you managed an incident successfully. You want to move that dial so that people know that Bob's great at this because the Great Bob incident was resolved well, and we took learnings from the Great Bob incident and we've carried it on to the future. So an apt analogy for this is pilots train for turbulence, not for crash site investigations. You want to know how to manage through this process. You don't want to have to analyze it after it's all crashed and burned. So I'll say here, I called this out at the very beginning, psychological safety in retros is key to making sure that we are able to get useful information out of these things. if engineers are afraid to say they don't know, or if they're afraid to say, I almost screwed up because I did X, Y, and Z, then you leave it open for bigger failures. You leave it open for, you're flying blind. You don't know how to improve if you don't let people give that feedback loop of, I'm uncomfortable with this, I don't know this, I need to do some more investigation. Admitting that you're lacking knowledge or admitting that you're wrong should not be a worry in a retrospective. I don't know is a perfectly valid answer. Real expertise comes from admitting that you don't know and working together with others to find out how to fill that gap. How many times have you been in a room with a bunch of people investigating an issue and everybody says, oh yeah, no, I know that system, And then as time goes on and you're still debugging it, you're still trying to figure out the problem, everybody finally fesses up that nobody has any idea what the system is, and they were just pretending that they did because they didn't want to admit it. You want to make sure that you present an opportunity for people to speak up, to say that they don't know, and so on, because that's what will actually get you moving forward. The whole thing you're trying to accomplish here is to find out why the decisions that you made during an incident were made at that time. It is not a case of whether it was right or wrong, it's a why. What is it that you were doing? Why did your decision-making go that direction while you were in the heat of the moment? People make decisions based on what they know in the environment at that particular time. If you don't take that information, go back, track that timeline, map those decision points, and figure out those areas, then you don't get the useful information out of it. Here's another one. You want to encourage questions. You want to encourage curiosity. You want to encourage the context sharing, not the silence. Some of the best retros happen when you invite people that are not in your area at all, that have never seen your code, that don't really understand how it works. They're the ones that get out of that tunnel vision that you might have because you work on this every day. If somebody from marketing comes in and says, what's that thing do? You have to stop and think about what it is that that thing does and explain it. Maybe that will, rubber ducking, let's figure out what's going on here because somebody asked the question that you have to answer. You want to encourage those who are not part of that direct line of sight to contribute. So how people adapt is what leads us towards better resilience. Knowing the why you did things is way more important than knowing whether it was right or wrong at the time. If your retrospective is like a corporate courtroom, then you're doing it wrong. You're not getting into the deeper questions. You're feeling like you're being grilled as opposed to feeling like you have a chance to speak up about what may or may not be going on. So there's retrospective pitfalls that come into play here. The what if problem. We should have known. That is as helpful as saying that I could have invested in this stock 10 years ago and be a millionaire now. Well, we all know that's not a real, well, I don't know, you're here, but it's not a real thing. So there's the counterfactual, we should have known, we should have understood this better. And if you get into that in retros, then you're losing the story. You're losing the ability to get deeper into things because you're saying, well, I just did it wrong. That's back to that wrong label, which is not a good place to be. You have the hindsight bias. If only we had done this thing. Well, again, that blocks your learning opportunities from it because you are not thinking about how to move it forward. The thing you want to ask, not who messed up, how did we get here? What situation allowed us to get to this point? I'm going to mention a John Allspaw insight because, you know, the godfather of incident management, he has a lot to say in here in the resilience engineering world. Human error is a symptom of deeper systemic issues and not root cause. So that goes back to the blameless concept. The people didn't do it, it's the situation did it. So in a world of blameless retrospectives, we've mentioned you don't want to say Bob did this thing, but you do want to document in your retrospective that Bob did this thing. That is not in the context of blame, that is the context of documentation. If you don't know who did it, then you don't know who to talk to find out more about how they can improve their areas. But it also should not be a checklist of this person did this bad thing. Bob's got a score of 10, so Bob should be out of here. No, this is, Bob has the most information about how we've dealt with these things in the past. I've been on retrospectives where we start talking about, well, I don't want to put anybody's name down. I don't want to name and shame. That's also not helpful by saying an engineer. That only tells part of the story. There's a little bit more, there's more deeper information that you can get by digging deeper and actually naming and not blaming. The other bit, we get the oversimplified root causes. How many retrospectives do you have that say, bad piece of code went out? Well, saying a bad piece of code went out, we all know, revert the code, that's fine. That does not solve your problems. You need to start instilling the 5 whys, and everybody I know bangs that drum. How do we get to the deeper root cause of things by talking about the 5 whys? You do want those uncomfortable conversations where you are pretty sure you've got the answer, but you just keep drilling down and drilling down and drilling down. You feel like an annoyed mom with their toddler going, why? You want to sit in those uncomfortable conversations. I've been on the receiving end of a few of those where it's just like I'm starting to twitch because it's a, well, why didn't you do this? Well, because I didn't have the money to buy that software. And all of those things, it goes all the way up the food chain as well. You say when excuse me, I need some water. Throw another John Allspaw note here. When we see retrospectives as investigations of what went wrong, we lose the opportunity to understand how things normally go right. That is a shift in perception here. We're not just analyzing what went wrong, we are comparing it against all the times that things went successfully. So what makes an effective retrospective? We've got the obvious, let's bang the drum on the MTTR. We all know that acronym. We all, I don't know, fear that acronym at times, but the goal is we want to know whether we're fixing things faster over time. If we're not tracking these numbers, if you don't have a baseline, you don't know whether you've achieved success. The ultimate goal, though, reducing recurring incidents. If you don't get deeper into that root cause analysis, you don't have that ability to reduce the recurring incidents. If you just go back to that, it was a bad software push, that's going to recur, it's going to happen over and over again, and you're just firefighting instead of actually solving the issues that came up in the retrospective. You want to think about, are you actually doing the retrospectives? Is this just the box checking exercise because upper management said you needed to do them? Or are you approaching them as a learning opportunity where you can really see what it is about your systems that are not quite, where they're diverging from that path where things are actually operating properly? The challenge a lot of times with people actually doing the retrospectives, they get busy. I'm going to say this is like watching those old police procedurals where it's like, oh yeah, I'd arrest you, buddy, but I don't want to do the paperwork. People are hesitant to call incidents because of that same reason. If you have this robust retrospective process, you need to assess it and see whether that's actually a valid retrospective process. If it's a Sev 4 that was just somebody got the wrong color checkbox, then maybe that shouldn't go through the whole process. You don't want to burn people out on doing the process, but you want to make that opportunity for people to understand why they're doing it. It should be an environment of continuous learning, and like I said, no blame, no shame, and figure out the areas where you can help out there. As well as the, are they getting completed? Do you have an SLA around them? Around how quick these documents are turned around. If you have a failure on one week and then it happens again the next week, well, did you even get to the retrospective? Did you get the information you needed? Some of those pieces of information you need are the goals, the action items that come out of these retros. If you don't get actionable items from the retros, then it's also just a waste of time, a box checking exercise, etc. You need these SMART goals. You need the specific, measurable, actionable, I always forget the acronym, actionable, relevant, and time-boxed. You need to say, this specific area is something that we can improve within this 2-week span because it will solve this, and you need to be able to track progress of these things. If they're just sitting in a bucket somewhere and never getting done, then they are also not helping your retrospective process. A retrospective without actionable insights is just an expensive therapy session. Or yet another meeting that could have been an email. So how do you improve systems through retros? Well, incidents are rarely caused by a single failure. It's usually the result of a complex set of conditions coming together. The planets aligned, something happened. Back to the oversimplified root causes, you might be missing some things. What signals did we miss? What assumptions shaped our decisions? Remember, at the time, those were what the decisions were because of X, Y, and Z. It won't be necessarily the same if you're doing it in the middle of the afternoon. 3 a.m. versus 2 p.m., two completely different troubleshooting cases. Then the other thing is, where do our mental models not match reality? Remember that laptop under somebody's desk that's running an integral part of your system? Well, that's not in your diagram. So figuring out where those gaps are. A couple of red flags in your retros. Oh, this will never happen again. The planet's just aligned that way on this particular day, and we'll never see that again. Wrong. You need to think about, say you're getting a 500 because some dependency was down. Well, you need to build resilience in your system to display at least the correct error message, or to time out for those things more quickly, or any number of things that you can think about just to smooth those rough edges. Know that nothing's ever perfect, et cetera. You need to build in those contingencies, and by looking at these things from the deeper scenario of where do all these things converge, you need to add in the resilience around those specific loose areas. So don't just look at what failed, look at what made sense at the time to take the actions that you did. Instead of asking why it failed, ask, how did it work until now? Like, why was that even working in the first place? Seriously, how many of you have seen that where you're like, I really don't understand how this even was up, ever? You want to also think about what prevented this from being worse. If the planets aligned on a Tuesday, is it going to be worse than a Wednesday? Well, how can you keep that piece of knowledge that you picked up? How did you keep that from going even worse and into the flames? I mentioned the specific, measurable, time-boxed goals and action items. Remember, if you don't accomplish them, then they're just, again, a box-checking exercise. These goals, you want to think about them in a couple of spans. You have your mitigating actions. You have the things that you did right in the moment to fix things. You have the It's a little looser than a mitigating action, but hey, we would have caught this had there been monitoring. That's going back to the anti-patterns of saying this would have been better if we had only. But things like adding in the monitoring and all of those are very quick actionable items. Then you also need to think about the systemic issues. Pretty much every incident will bring up some sort of systemic issue. Yeah, we had a push. Why did we have a bad code push? Well, because we didn't have a stage environment to test against. Well, why don't we have a stage environment? Well, that's a longer story, but you can keep going down those 5 whys. Well, because we didn't have time to put into building this non-prod environment to allow us to test our code end to end. If you start thinking about these systemic issues and recording the systemic issues, it also takes a little bit of heat off of the in-the-moment troubleshooting, because you know that these have been documented, you know that these are systemic issues that you need to start tracking towards for resolving your problems moving forward. If you don't write it down, it's not going to happen. I've been in retros where people are like, oh yeah, it's because it's part of the monolith, everything's too intrinsically tied and it's going to happen. You look at the document, that's not written down. If you don't write it down, you can't use AI to dig through them, you can't, as a human, look through them, you just have to rely on that tribal knowledge. And tribal knowledge is not the way to do things. I know all of us have probably built our career on a good source of tribal knowledge, but let's not do that. So we've got the immediate fixes, we've got the slightly less immediate fixes, and we've got the systemic issues to think about. And then go back to the usual, I know we all hate documentation, go back to document, document, document. If you don't write it down, nobody sees it, nobody else has it, it's tribal knowledge in your head. That's the only way you're going to get history repeating itself. So incident management, scaling beyond just the incidents. A couple things you need to do here, and this will help with that psychological safety. It takes away some of the decision making in the heat of the moment. Remember, not everything is a Sev 1. If everything is important, nothing is important. You want to think about things in terms of the severity. What's the impact? What's the blast radius? Not just that, though, you want to think about things in terms of the priority. If it's one guy having an issue, but he's part of your biggest client's company, then you want to potentially shift that severity. But you want to build this in such a way that these pass the objective 3 a.m. test. If you get woken up, do I know how to rate these things? Do I know what alarm bells to sound to get the right engagement for moving this forward? And when you rely on strictly the tribal knowledge, then you increase the engineer's cognitive load. And at 3 a.m., I've got no space for cognitive load. So you want to make sure that this is well socialized, well documented, et cetera, so that people can react without having to think too hard. If you don't get these areas refined, it really does remove that sense of psychological safety. You are leaving too many decisions to be made in the heat of the moment, and it makes people feel like they need to defend why they made the decisions instead of just discussing why they made the decisions. So, called out here, you want to automate the responses but keep the humans involved. Back to that severity definitions, you obviously want to automate that as much as possible so that you can get things progressing without having to put too much thought into it. You don't want to completely exclude people. You do want to have a run book that's automated where it will tell you right then and there, what's the next step I should take? What should I do here? What should I do here? 3 a.m., you don't have to think about it. It's the system's telling you. So you do definitely want to encourage that. But you also need to keep the humans in the loop. Without having that direct feedback from the humans, you can't advance as well. You don't have the corrections to the system that you can make, etc. AI can be oh, AI is a good thing, but AI can be a bad thing. You want to get the AI to look at all of your retrospectives you've done and find the commonality between them. It might call out patterns that you people overlooked, but as well it might call out patterns that are just a complete load of crap. So you need to use AI as a tool and use it as a point of assessment, but not the only assessment. You want to ensure cross-team visibility. If these guys over here had a SQL proxy error and they don't tell these guys over here, then they potentially are both going to have the same issue and everybody has to reinvent the wheel. You need to have a regular cadence of discussing what happened so that nobody is redoing the same thing that you just did. You want to engage the support teams. Support teams are your first line of defense. They are the ones who see things first, and they might recognize the patterns. Back to that whole invite people who may be not part of your system. They should be part of your system. They are part of the observability, not a separate function. To the no DeLorean bug fixes concept, you get the system drift. Remember, there's no such thing as a hack. That hack is permanently entrenched in your system, and it goes back to the not being able to visualize your entire system without thinking about where things are at any given point in time. The incidents expose those long-standing hidden issues where these hacks, some guy that used to work here 2 years ago made this hack, and this is now a permanent state of our system. That's a gap that you're going to have to think about and how you can bring these in. So you lose that piece of information when you're just fixing the symptoms instead of fixing why it persisted in the first place. That's the education that you need to get out of these. So building a learning culture, you document the fixes, you also make them accessible. You have this folder here that says the retrospectives, or whatever tool you're using. A lot of the incident management tools are very similar, but they have a way for you to do consistent retrospectives and track them. Mentioned that creating the regular review forums. This team had this problem, this team had this problem. If they don't talk, they're just doing the same work over and over again. You build a culture where asking what don't we know is a strength and not a weakness. You've got 5 steps you want to follow here. You learn, you don't blame. You improve the observability. You see the fires before that smoldering thing becomes raging flames. You use all of the available data. You have customer support is a component of your observability. It is an early warning system. They are your partner in finding patterns, and they give great feedback, and they are a valid feedback loop as well. If you enable them to escalate and provide them with the tools for doing so, then you have that much stronger of a system. You need to look for recurring patterns. Back to that AI. Use that AI to your benefit, but don't completely trust it. Skynet's going to tell you all sorts of horrible things about your system. You need to track the systemic issues. If it's not tracked, it won't be fixed. And closing thoughts. Resilience, engineering, insight. The strongest teams are not the ones that avoid failure. They are the ones that learn from it the fastest. That is the very most important thing to remember here. The psychological safety, the continuous learning, the structured retrospectives, that results in fewer retrospectives or fewer incidents. You should have as many retrospectives as you have incidents. It may not be a live, in-person, in-depth review, but you should have a retrospective for every incident. This builds stronger teams. The goal is not perfection. It's handling incidents better every time you encounter one. Stop blaming the past, start fixing the future, start enabling your colleagues to help you fix the future. Any questions? Yes?
So you mentioned the 5 whys. Is there any tips that you have in regards to avoid branching or going into bias when you're talking about with the tunnel where you're like, oh, I know exactly what the problem is and just building it down to that point?
It is a challenge. I've had to stop many a 5 why session because it does have that tendency to branch into what the expected results are. Don't be afraid to stop the 5 whys, to redirect, divert, go, no, pretend that didn't happen, and let's go back to earlier in the state, or how the system was, we can talk about how the system was performing well, how the system performs under normal conditions, and using that to be the branch of why, or the deeper whys that you're trying to get through. It is, I think my big one I'll call out is, don't be afraid to stop it and start over again. Yes? That is one that is challenging, definitely. Sorry, yeah, it's a little hard to hear. It's when you have vendors integrated in your system and they release their RCAs, it's just kind of we put out a bad code push. How do you incorporate that into your RCA process, your retrospective process? I'll say that goes back to what I was saying about build that resilience into your system, where it's not that this failed, it's how do we deal with that failure, and that's where you improve. You can't depend on the vendors to give you the information you need, but you can build up your system in such a way that it adapts to that. At least it doesn't just completely take a dive and completely mangle the user's experience. You can tell the users what's going on, etc. That's why I say you got to go a little bit deeper on the figuring out where, with the root cause, and figuring out, well, why did the customer get a bad experience here? Well, how do we prevent getting that bad experience by building the safety net into our own code as opposed to relying on the vendor's 100% reliability? Yes? So the question was, how do you structure your retrospectives? How do you do it so it's not just a bunch of people doing a box checking exercise in a room? How do you get the thoughtful insights out of it? Step one, get the documentation filled out in advance. Get the timelines documented, get the detection, get all of the information about how people handled things at the time. All of this work can be pre-work and reduce the amount of time that you have to spend in a Zoom room, talking about these things. Get people to pre-read it, get people to comment on it. You get all of that work. Google Docs is great for being able to add all of that commentary in there and pose those questions before you get to that meeting. You can reduce a retrospective down to a half-an-hour meeting if you've done that pre-work. And it also puts some accountability. You see that this person has looked at it, this person has looked at it, this person has made commentary there, and then you can take those ones that you've distilled and run through it a lot more quickly and get that information documented in a much more concise way than sitting in a room staring at each other going, I don't know, what about you?
All right, thank you so much.